When we think about dating today, we picture personal choice, freedom, attraction, and maybe a little excitement or awkwardness. But in the medieval world, dating was not a personal adventure. It was a carefully monitored, highly restricted activity, if it could even be called dating at all. Back then, who you loved or married wasn't really up to you. Your romantic life was a product of strict control by your family, rigid rules set by your society, and moral expectations dictated by religion. These three forces, family, society, and religion, intertwined to create a world where personal feelings were often the least important part of a romantic relationship. In medieval Europe, especially among the nobility, marriage was not seen as a union of two lovers. It was a transaction, a strategic alliance. Families arranged marriages to increase wealth, political influence, and social status. If a daughter could marry into a wealthier or more powerful family, that was considered a victory, not just for her, but for the entire household. Young women were often promised in marriage while they were still children. Sometimes, the agreements were made even before they were born, solidified in writing by powerful families with titles and property to exchange. The concept of love was secondary, if it was considered at all. A girl's heart was rarely consulted, and a boy's desire was often redirected toward duty. Among peasants, things were a little more flexible, but not by much. While they didn't have castles or estates to negotiate over, their romantic lives were still heavily influenced by their families. Parents typically expected to approve any courtship before it could begin. A young man might be discouraged or even banned from pursuing a particular girl if her family disapproved, and vice versa. Fathers had the final say, and mothers often acted as quiet enforcers of tradition. A son who went against his parents' wishes might be disinherited or sent away to work elsewhere. For women, the consequences were more severe. A girl who refused a suitable marriage could be labeled disobedient or ungrateful, and in some cases, she could be forced into a nunnery. Courtship rituals were less about romance and more about negotiation. If a young man wanted to marry, he would first need the approval of his own parents, then formally approach the girl's family, often through a mediator or with a gift. In noble families, this process could take months and involve written contracts. Among the poor, it might mean a handshake deal between fathers. Either way, the young couple had limited say. Their personal chemistry, if it existed, came as a bonus, but it was never the goal. Love was seen as unpredictable and therefore dangerous. It could distract people from their duties, cause jealousy, spark scandals, and create social chaos. It had to be controlled. And that's where society stepped in. In the medieval mindset, everything had a place, including love. Society valued order and hierarchy above all else. People were expected to stay in their assigned roles. Peasants remained peasants. Nobles married other nobles, and gender roles were strictly enforced. Men were expected to be providers and protectors, while women were supposed to be obedient, chaste, and loyal. This social code applied to romance too. A nobleman couldn't marry a servant without causing scandal, and a woman couldn't pursue a man on her own. Flirtation, if it happened, had to be subtle. Any sign of rebellion against these social norms could result in gossip, punishment, or exile. One of the clearest examples of societal control was the enforcement of dowries. A dowry was money, land, or goods given by the bride's family to the grooms. It wasn't optional, it was a requirement. No dowry often meant no marriage. Families spent years saving or negotiating for dowries, and in some cases, daughters were left unmarried because the family couldn't afford to marry them off. A girl's worth was often measured by her dowry, which only reinforced the idea that love was a luxury the rich could barely afford, and the poor couldn't even consider. But the most powerful force of all in medieval relationships was religion. The Catholic Church had absolute authority over marriage laws and moral behavior, and it used that power to shape people's romantic lives in extreme ways. The Church dictated who could marry, when they could marry, and even how they could behave within marriage. Sex outside of marriage was a sin. Premarital affection was discouraged, and the idea of courtship as we know it today was virtually non-existent. The Church also enforced the concept of consent, but not in the way we understand it now. A marriage was considered valid if both parties gave verbal consent, even if they were pressured into it by their families. This gave families legal cover to push their children into unions they didn't want. Confessionals became a place where people admitted romantic or sexual thoughts, often seeking forgiveness. Priests warned young people about the dangers of lust and love, painting romance as a temptation that led away from God. Some church leaders even discouraged touching or kissing between spouses unless it was strictly for procreation. In this climate, romantic love had no room to flourish. It was either suppressed or condemned. For those who broke the rules, the punishments could be brutal. A woman caught in adultery could be stoned, burned, or exiled. A man might escape with a fine or a flogging, but if his affair threatened social order, he too could face prison or execution. The Church also controlled when marriages could occur. Certain holy days and seasons were off limits, and couples were expected to marry in public, in front of witnesses, and with a priest's blessing. Secret marriages were considered suspicious and often invalidated. This was a time when love wasn't just monitored by family and society, but by heaven itself. The idea that two people could simply fall in love and choose to be together without anyone else's permission was radical, even dangerous. Despite all these controls, people still found ways to love. They passed secret notes, sang love songs, carved initials into trees, and met in the shadows. Courtly love, a stylized, often non-physical romance, emerged as a kind of emotional rebellion against the restrictions. A knight might devote his life to a noble lady he could never marry. A poem might be written in secret, passed along by servants, or performed at feasts under the guise of entertainment. These expressions of love were bittersweet, beautiful, but always distant. They were dreams people clung to in a world where real romance was forbidden. Even within arranged marriages, love sometimes grew. A couple forced together for political reasons might eventually come to respect or even care for each other. These stories were rare, but they offered hope in a system designed to suppress emotional choice. In some cases, women found subtle ways to influence their husbands or families, especially if they were intelligent and persuasive. Men, too, occasionally defied expectations, choosing love over duty, though they often paid a steep price for it. The tight control over dating and relationships had long-term effects on culture. Stories, songs, and legends from the Middle Ages are filled with themes of forbidden love, tragic romance, and the fight between heart and duty. Think of the tragic love of Tristan and Isolde, or the doomed passion between Lancelot and Guinevere. These tales captured the deep longing people felt for love that was free and real, and even though they were often sad or fatal, they offered an emotional escape from a society where love was always second to something else. As time moved on and the Renaissance began to take shape, new ideas started to challenge the old ones. Humanism emphasized individual worth and emotion, slowly changing how people thought about love and marriage. But even then, the old systems of control held on. Families still arranged marriages, society still judged harshly, and religion still claimed moral authority. It would take centuries for dating to become a matter of personal freedom. Today, it's hard to imagine needing your father's permission to date someone or being forced to marry a stranger for land or livestock. But in the medieval world, this was normal. Your heart belonged first to your family, then to your community, then to God, and only last to yourself. To love freely was a rebellion. To choose your own partner was revolutionary. And yet, even in the face of control, people never stopped longing for love. They risked punishment, rejection, and ruin just for a chance to connect. That longing is something we still understand today. It's the proof that no matter how much power society or religion holds, the human spirit still yearns to love and to be loved. In it, close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You live in a world where love is dangerous, not because it's forbidden outright, but because expressing it openly could ruin reputations, destroy family alliances, and even put your life at risk. This was the medieval world, a world where romance existed in the shadows, behind veils, beneath layers of coded language, tokens, and glances that had to be read like poetry. In this world, love was often not shouted from rooftops. It was whispered between pages, stitched into handkerchiefs, and expressed through music and symbols. Romantic expression in the medieval era wasn't what we think of today. There were no texts, no candlelit dinners, no public declarations under the stars. Instead, there was a subtle art of symbolism, deeply coded and almost theatrical. The act of falling in love and showing love required cleverness, discretion, and often a good understanding of courtly behavior, especially in the upper classes where marriages were arranged and love was not a priority in partnerships. True affection had to be hidden. In medieval courts, courtly love was born. It was an idealized form of love that often existed outside marriage. Courtly love was usually secret, extramarital, and more about emotional and poetic connection than physical interaction. It was romantic, chaste, and highly symbolic. Think of a knight pledging himself to a noblewoman far above his station. He might never touch her hand, but he would write verses in her honor, wear her favor, a ribbon or handkerchief tied to his lance during a joust, and swear to do great deeds for her name. He was her servant in love, and she, his unattainable. Symbols became the language of the heart. Flowers, for instance, carried coded messages. A red rose might mean passionate love, while a white one meant purity or admiration. A daisy symbolized loyalty, and violets were for faithfulness. These meanings were not random. They were part of a shared cultural language, known by nobles, troubadours, and ladies-in-waiting alike. Gifting a flower wasn't a casual act. It was a declaration, a whisper of something deeper. Gloves and handkerchiefs were also powerful tokens. A lady might drop her glove accidentally in the presence of a knight she favored. He would pick it up, perhaps kiss it discreetly, and treasure it as a sacred object. A handkerchief given before battle was more than a cloth. It was a promise, a blessing, a secret love letter in fabric form. These tokens would be carried into war, sewn into tunics, tucked under armor, and sometimes buried with the knight if he fell in battle. Even colors played a part in this romantic code. Blue might be worn to show loyalty or constancy. Green could suggest growing love, or in some cases, jealousy. Yellow was often a sign of rejection or faded affection. When people could not speak freely, they used these nonverbal cues to say what words could not. Music and poetry flourished in this environment of secret yearning. Troubadours, poet-musicians in southern France, composed lyrical songs that traveled across courts and kingdoms. Their ballads told stories of unreachable ladies, burning love, and endless devotion. These songs weren't always personal, but they mirrored the emotional experience of those in courtly love. A lady could hear a song and recognize her own story in its verses, even if it was never about her specifically. Writing poetry became a dangerous and romantic act. Lovers would exchange verses, often encoded with allusions that only the two of them could understand. Poems written in Latin, French, or the vernacular were shared in secret, hidden in books, sewn into the linings of garments, or slipped between pages of prayer books. They spoke of longing, sleepless nights, and stolen glances. The metaphor was everything. A rose could be a kiss. A storm, a moment of passion. A locked garden, the inaccessibility of a woman's heart. And of course, letters, long, passionate, often tortured, were another vehicle of romantic expression. But again, they had to be written carefully, knowing they could be intercepted or read by the wrong eyes. Even the way a letter was folded or sealed could carry meaning. Wax seals with personalized stamps were like a signature, a final word of emotion before the letter passed into someone else's hands. Lovers also used gestures and rituals. Touching a certain part of the body while speaking could be suggestive. A brush of the hand, a meaningful bow, the placing of a palm over the heart. Gaze held tremendous power. Prolonged eye contact in public could be scandalous, even if no words were spoken. In a time when women were expected to be modest and silent, even a smile could carry weight. But the secrecy wasn't just about romance. It was about survival. Love could be political, especially among the nobility. A misplaced letter or ill-timed glance could start rumors that damaged entire families. For a noblewoman, being accused of improper conduct could mean disgrace, exile, or worse. So discretion became a part of romantic expression. Everything had to be masked in propriety. Poems shared between two lovers might also be read aloud in court as entertainment, its double meaning known only to its author and muse. Even the church got involved in shaping how love could be expressed. Passion and desire were viewed with suspicion. Marriage was about duty, not emotion. But the human heart has never obeyed rules easily, so the people of the medieval world invented a way to love that lived beneath the surface, a theater of devotion and longing played out in silence and symbols. In lower social classes, where people had fewer resources for symbolic gifts or poetry, romance still found a way. Secret meetings in fields or forests, small handmade tokens, folk songs whispered at night. All were part of the way love bloomed under the radar. It may have lacked the pageantry of the court, but it had just as much heart. Even public festivals were used as windows for expression. May Day, for example, was a time of love and fertility, and it gave young people a rare excuse to mingle and flirt more freely. Dances, flower crowns, and rituals became chances for romantic signals to be exchanged without drawing suspicion. A man might carve his initials into a tree, leave a flower on a windowsill, or craft a small wooden charm. These gestures weren't grand, but they carried immense personal meaning. The medieval period was also full of romantic legends that reinforced these ideas. Tales of Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, or Abelard and Heloise weren't just stories, they were emotional roadmaps. They taught people how to love in silence, how to suffer for it, and how to express it nobly. These stories gave lovers courage and language, a way to believe that even hidden love had beauty and value. Sometimes, entire relationships existed in this dreamlike world of symbol and suggestion. A knight might spend his life admiring a lady he never truly touched, never kissed, never even spoke to alone. But his loyalty to her would shape his life, his poetry, his actions, and she in turn would carry that knowledge like a hidden fire. They didn't need confirmation, just the unspoken bond between them was enough. Over time, this symbolic language of love evolved. By the late medieval and early Renaissance period, romantic expression became more confident. Literature began to explore mutual affection, not just suffering and unreachability. But the foundation remained. The deep belief that love, when hidden, was somehow more sacred. When it could not be spoken, it was expressed with even greater creativity and care. Even today, traces of this symbolic romantic tradition remain. We give roses to say I love you. We write poems for those we admire. We hold on to tokens, lockets, letters, and songs that remind us of someone special. We still believe in some way that the smallest things, a glance, a touch, a flower, can mean the most. So, the next time you see a bouquet of flowers or hear a love song, remember that you're part of a tradition that stretches back centuries. A tradition that began in silence and symbolism, where love had to find a way through locked doors, hidden notes, and veiled looks. It wasn't loud, it wasn't easy, but it was profound, and it was real. Romantic expression in medieval times might have been secretive, but it was anything but shallow. It was art, it was devotion, and it was love in its most poetic form. Love in the medieval world was rarely a matter of choice or passion. It was an arrangement, a negotiation, a contract, a transaction, guided by rigid expectations and severe consequences. Forget the fairy tales of knights rescuing maidens or princesses falling for stable boys. The truth was often darker, shaped by the crushing weight of tradition, honor, and fear of disgrace. In an age where reputation was everything and family lineage dictated social survival, love could be dangerous, even deadly. Marriages were primarily strategic. They weren't about two people falling for each other. They were about uniting land, securing political power, and preserving wealth. In noble families, love was a complication they couldn't afford. A daughter's marriage could mean the rise or fall of an entire dynasty. A son's choice of wife could either maintain the family's honor or disgrace it forever. Peasants weren't exempt either, though their marriages were less about power and more about survival. Still, even the poor were expected to marry within their social class, and defying that expectation could invite community shame or rejection. And yet, love has never been something that obeys rules. Secret affairs bloomed like wildflowers in the cracks of stone walls. Forbidden letters were exchanged, glances stolen in markets, hands brushed in candlelit chapels. But the risks were immense. If a noblewoman dared to fall for a man below her station, she could be locked in a convent, disinherited, or worse. Adultery wasn't just scandalous, it was punishable. For women especially, the stakes were brutally high. A woman caught in an affair might be publicly humiliated, imprisoned, or executed. A man might suffer too, but often he faced fewer consequences unless the affair threatened political alliances. The church loomed large over every romantic impulse. The Catholic Church, a dominant force in medieval Europe, dictated not only who you could love, but when and how. Marriages required church blessing, and unions outside the church were often considered illegitimate. Premarital sex was a sin. Adultery was worse. Homosexuality was deemed a crime. Even expressions of affection were closely monitored. Public displays of emotion, especially from women, were seen as signs of weakness or rebellion. But the rules weren't just about what happened between lovers. They were also about what happened between families. Parents had near total control over their children's marriages, especially daughters. A young woman could be promised to a man she'd never met, married off at the age of 12 or 13, often to someone decades older. Her voice, her desires, her dreams, none of these mattered. Her value was determined by her virginity, her obedience, her dowry. If she defied those expectations, if she dared to pursue love outside her family's plan, she risked everything. Stories from history show just how harsh the consequences could be. Take the tragic fate of lovers like Peter Abelard and Heloise. Abelard, a philosopher and teacher, fell in love with his brilliant student, Heloise. Their affair was passionate, intellectual, and deeply forbidden. When Heloise became pregnant, the scandal exploded. Abelard was attacked and castrated by Heloise's outraged uncle. Abelard was forced into a convent. They lived the rest of their lives apart, their love surviving only in letters. It's a story that still echoes today because it reflects the brutal truth. In the medieval world, love could cost you everything. In villages and towns, local laws could be just as merciless. A couple caught in an illicit relationship could be dragged before a manorial court. Punishments ranged from fines to public whippings to exile. Women often bore the brunt. A pregnant, unmarried woman could be cast out of her community, her child labeled a bastard, denied inheritance and status. Men might deny paternity, escape punishment, or pay a small fine. The imbalance was glaring, and it reinforced the belief that women were the guardians of morality and the scapegoats for its failure. Even within marriage, love was constrained. Husbands held legal control over their wives. A woman's body, labor, and property belonged to her husband. Marital rape wasn't recognized as a crime. Domestic abuse, though frowned upon in some circles, was rarely punished unless it disrupted the broader community. Love, if it existed in marriage, had to survive within a cage. Romantic affection, tenderness, even companionship, these were bonuses, not expectations. Marriage was about duty, obligation, and legacy. Yet people found ways to resist. Courtly love, an idealized, often poetic form of romantic expression, emerged as a cultural rebellion. In the courts of southern France, poets and troubadours sang of impossible love, of knights pining for married noblewomen, of longing that defied law and reason. It was a fantasy, but it allowed people to imagine a world where love could transcend duty. These stories didn't change the rules, but they softened their edges. They created a space where emotions could be honored, if only in verse. There were also moments of defiance that broke through the darkness. Some couples married in secret, hoping to later win approval. Some women refused arranged marriages, fled their homes, or joined convents to avoid forced unions. These acts were dangerous, and many paid dearly for their courage, but they also remind us that even in the harshest times, love inspired resistance. It gave people strength to fight for something more than survival. It offered a glimpse of freedom in a world built on control. Punishments for disobedience weren't just social, they could be spiritual. The church warned of eternal damnation for sins of the flesh. Confession became a tool of control, where lovers were forced to reveal their guilt, seek penance, and swear to never fall again. Guilt and love became entwined, creating a cycle of desire and punishment that shaped medieval life for centuries. And yet, the heart remained stubborn. People continued to fall, again and again, regardless of the warnings. The same-sex love, the consequences were even more brutal. The medieval church condemned homosexuality as a grave sin. Those caught could face excommunication, imprisonment, or execution. Inquisitions, especially in later centuries, pursued not just heretics, but anyone whose desires strayed from accepted norms. Many lived double lives, hiding their true feelings, marrying to preserve appearances while suffering in silence. Their stories are harder to trace, buried under fear and secrecy, but they were real, and they speak to a broader truth about the cruelty of forbidden love. Still, love found a way. It always does. Hidden in the shadows of castles and cloisters, behind barn doors and in forest clearings, people risked everything to feel close to someone who made them feel alive. They wrote letters in secret codes, exchanged tokens of affection, whispered dreams in the dark. These acts may seem small, but they were revolutionary. They challenged a system designed to crush individuality, and they left behind echoes we still feel today. By the end of the medieval era, things began to shift. The Renaissance brought new ideas about individuality and human emotion. Literature began to explore the depths of romantic longing, not just as a moral risk, but as a meaningful part of life. Still, the legacy of medieval rules endured. For centuries more, marriage remained an economic tool. Honor continued to trump happiness. Love was a fire to be managed, not embraced. But history isn't just about power and punishment. It's also about persistence. The fact that people kept loving, despite the consequences, is proof of something deeply human. We crave connection. We long for understanding, warmth, and acceptance. Even when the world says no, our hearts say yes. Today, when we talk about love, we often take for granted the freedom to choose, to express, to pursue what we feel. But it wasn't always this way. For most of human history, love had to survive in secret. It had to dodge rules, endure shame, and outlast punishment. The scars of that past are still with us, in our traditions, in our fears, in the quiet ways we sometimes question our worth or our right to be loved. But so is the strength of those who dared to love when it was forbidden, who chose connection over comfort, who wrote their own stories in a world that tried to write it for them. Love in the medieval world wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battle, a rebellion, a fragile, radiant act of hope in a world full of barriers. And maybe that's why it still matters, because it reminds us of everything love can endure and everything it can overcome.